Comrade, this is the sweet occasion that said I am because we are. And this is the walkabout of said exhibition. So, where are we? We are on Mars, or at least the 360-degree panorama view, or photo, captured by NASA's Curiosity rover. And what is this exhibition about? This exhibition grapples with two questions. The first question being, can we use the African philosophy Ubuntu as a philosophical framework to help us achieve this grand project of us becoming an interplanetary species? And then secondly, can we use the Southern African tree, the sweet thorn acacia, as a metaphor to help us understand how we can terraform an arid environment through a mutualistic relationship with other organisms? We will be dividing these two questions into two separate videos. So let's start with the first part. We will be looking at Nyasha Mboti and his work, May the Real Ubuntu Please Stand Up. And he is challenging this dichotomist view of African socialism. And by that, what do we mean? He is challenging this idea that there's a very clear distinction between Western liberalism that emphasizes the individual and African socialism that emphasizes community and community philosophy. He's saying this is not correct, and this very romanticized idea of Ubuntu has really permeated in contemporary South Africa, and maybe rightfully so, because what we were trying to achieve was a very difficult thing to do. So let's first look at how this idea first came about. We have the popular aphorism, Umuntu, Ngomuntu, Ngabantu, which basically translates to a person is a person through another person, or more popularly, I am because we are. And one of the most credited definitions of Ubuntu comes from our political leader, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, where I'm paraphrasing him. He said, "My humanity is trapped. It is inexplicably bound up with yours." And this idea that Nyasha Mboti is challenging is that this basically defines my identity and your identity as something that cannot be separated from the group. In other words, my relationship towards you is what defines my identity. The role that autonomy plays and critical thinking plays is a secondary or is a byproduct of my relationship with the group. Or in fact, he would argue it doesn't really exist. Because as said, my humanity is inexplicably, meaning you cannot separate it, bound up with yours. So he challenges this dichotomy through a few analogies, some of them being very colorful, and it is a paper worth reading. I will leave a link to it in the description. But in this video, we are going to be looking at two analogies. First analogy being, he's using two African proverbs. A child who doesn't cry is a child who dies in his mother's crib or mother's sling. And the second one being, the obedient child is rewarded with tasty treats. So this really captures the same child, and the same child is in the one hand very disobedient and in the other hand very obedient. And this is what Mboti is aiming to capture with his renegotiation with the definition of Ubuntu in contemporary South Africa. We want people who are also disobedient and are not necessarily confined to the community defining their identity, but they are also their own agents for their own future. And why is this very important? Because if we look at the history of South Africa, disobedience is what helped us change the history of this country. If we had to emphasize this idea of greatest harmony, then challenging an apartheid government would go against the idea of Ubuntu, because in fact you are not being harmonious. In order to bring about dignifying change, we also need to be disobedient and think for ourselves and think critically, so that when we do play a part within the group, we are playing a part that will propel society into a direction that could be beneficial to so many more people, and so enabling to so many more people. But we also want obedience in order to facilitate the social cohesion and this ability to work together and have harmony. Because without stability, we cannot really have a society that grows together and that enables one another. So the other analogy that I want to talk about is where he is challenging this traditional way of understanding gifting of humanity. There was a view that your humanity is given to you as a gift and that you cannot gain it by yourself. You have to have a relationship with the community, and another individual will then gift you the opportunity to be a person. While you do not have your humanity, you are simply an it or a dweller. And he's playing a very clever epistemological game where, if we work our way back to the original gifter of humanity, that individual did indeed have autonomy, and they would then be in the position to decide who should be given their humanity. And instead of having this complete reliance on the group that should give you your humanity and you will be defined as an it, you should also have agency to give humanity as well. So this is where I want to segue into the work of Susie Pottier, who, as stated, was on a 15-month-long expedition at Dumont d'Urville, a scientific center based in Antarctica. And this ice environment, meaning isolated, confined, and extreme, there the social glue manifested in another manner. To maintain social cohesion is time. So winterers, these are individuals that are stationed at the scientific center, they will have their primary responsibility. And this primary responsibility will differ from individual to individual. And they will then use their free time as a way of giving back and resisting the connotation of being lazy. Because within an environment such as the Dumont d'Urville is found, or you cannot have an individual that is quote unquote on holiday, because resources are incredibly limited and the environment requires individuals to think of one another as one unit. So the way this gifting happens is that you would complete your primary responsibility. And then when you see another winterer that's maybe carrying heavy equipment or that needs help taking notes while they're doing their research in Antarctica, or for example, after a blizzard and you need to shovel the snow. It's these small little exchanges that keeps this social cohesion, the social glue. And what is interesting is that this is a very dynamic exercise. There's no static rules that defines an individual being responsible for this and for that after your primary responsibilities have been completed. Your volunteer work is very dynamic, and it should remain dynamic, because if you, for example, provide your free time to one specific individual all the time, that could lead to issues of subgroups forming within this group, and this would lead to various divisions. So ideally, if you receive volunteer work from another member, reciprocating that immediately could cause issues. So it is better to take your free time and use it for another winterer. And that way you slowly but surely help one another, and the group retains its cohesion. Now, this is not as simple, because there are individuals, there are winterers that do not necessarily receive the same level of recognition. An example, as noted by Susie Pottier, was when they were shoveling snow after a blizzard, and one winterer was visibly agitated as they were not receiving the recognition as other winterers were receiving, arguing that his labor is more arduous. And after this individual left, the person that was shoveling snow with Susie Pottier explained that even though there is an appreciation of this individual's labor, and he does quite a lot for the group, his primary responsibility is not necessarily as tasking, and therefore he has more time to use for work that is maybe arduous. And individuals that have very demanding primary responsibilities will then use their free time for lighter work. So, how to divide this recognition is a very interesting problem, especially if we want to move into interplanetary journeys. And yeah, but this idea of gifting of time plays in well with the way that Ubuntu functions and how we maintain our social cohesion by working with one another, but then at the same time, as Nyasha Mboti would explain, that we also have autonomy, deciding who we should help. And this is not necessarily done as a blind exercise. So this is only a digging of the surface of this idea of whether we could use Ubuntu as a philosophical framework to achieve this grand project. And maybe deeper exploration into this idea would be great. We still have to explore ideas, for example, restorative justice. And if you're interested, let me know in the comment section, and then we'll do more projects and more work on this idea. And then now for part 2, where we will be exploring the sweet dawn acacia as a metaphor for a mutualistic relationships to terraform arid environments. We will be exploring that in the next video. So first of all, I want to say thank you if you've listened up until this point, and then Yes, I hope to see you in the next video. Comrade.